And our next guest is Dan Kildee. And I've got an introduction for him. We're so happy that you're here today, Dan. Thank you. I know you don't really need an introduction, but I think it's still good to go through this and remind ourselves. Dan Kildee is the president and CEO of the Community Foundation of Greater Flint. In the fall of 2025, Dan also began his 3-year appointment as the Griffin Chair of American Government at Central Michigan University. Dan served as a member of Congress, our U.S. Congressman, mine, from 2013 to 2025, representing Michigan's 8th and previously Michigan's 5th Congressional District. He served on the Ways and Means Committee and the Budget Committee. He also co-chaired the bipartisan Congressional PFAS Task Force to more urgently clean up toxic PFAS chemicals. Before being elected to Congress, Dan co-founded and served as president of the Center for Community Progress, a national nonprofit organization where he was one of the nation's leading voices on urban land reform and revitalization. He also founded Michigan's first land bank, the Genesee County Land Bank, which is responsible for over $100 million in redevelopment in the city of Flint. Dan previously served as a Genesee County Commissioner and as County Treasurer. He also previously served as a member of the Flint Board of Education after being elected at age 18, one of the youngest elected officials in the country at the time. Dan is a graduate of CMU, Central Michigan University. He is married to Jennifer Kildee, has 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren. He enjoys hunting, fishing, cycling, golf, and is an avid drummer. I didn't know that. Come on up, Dan.
Thank you so much for that introduction and for inviting me to be a part of this. My voice is a little bit afoul as a result of all this smoke that has been coming across the board. I don't know if Trump's going to suggest a really big wall now for Canada to keep the smoke out. Oh, thanks. I am a little taller. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. So I really thought hard about what I wanted to say here, knowing that some of you perhaps were not, and it looks like a good number of you were not at the event last year. I may touch on some of those themes. I do know that having spent a career making speeches, it's never a good idea to either follow a preacher or a poet, so I'll do my best. That was a really powerful message. And really all I want to do today, this morning, or this afternoon, very briefly, is just kind of bring John Lewis to this space that we're in. Very often I ask myself, what would John do in this moment? As was noted, we lost John 6 years ago. I first came to know him the way virtually all of us had, and that is by looking at those old grainy images, particularly of that speech that he gave on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in the big march on Washington. He was one of the most powerful voices in that moment, largely because of the moral clarity in his message. But to me, it also is because he was 23 years old when he gave that speech. He was helping lead the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was one of a handful of voices really leading the civil rights movement. And I mentioned that I first became aware of him as a student of history, literally as a student, by watching those old grainy images of this person whom I saw as a bit of an abstraction, as one of the leaders of a movement that was so big and that I thought was really over by the time I came into my own political existence. It was mentioned that I got elected to public office at a really young age. I was 18 years old. Matt Schlinker, one of my oldest and dearest friends, he remembers that because he and I graduated from high school together. That was more than a decade ago. He was actually a year ahead of me. That was a year ahead. That first race, the reason I was so anxious to get into it is that I was one of those precocious kids that didn't watch cartoons. I watched the news. I paid attention to the news. I grew up in a family where politics was sort of the family business, as many of you know. So I was very aware. And I was also very impatient, very anxious to get involved. But I kind of felt like back then in the late 1970s, with my long hair and the beautiful blue dashiki that I wore every time it was a formal event. My campaign manager, by the way, back then, does anybody have the trivia note on this, who my campaign manager was for that 1977 campaign when I got elected when I was 18 years old?
Michael Moore.
It was Michael Moore. It was another guy who got elected at age 18. But that tells you sort of where my sensibilities came from. But I had always kind of felt like I was late to the argument, sort of late to the party. I mean, think about, but for those of you who experienced and can remember the 1960s, it was a really tumultuous period. The civil rights movement, really the nascent stages of the strengthening of the women's movement, the very early stages of a strong LGBTQ movement. All of the big movements of our time, the anti-war movement for sure, you can trace back to just a handful of years where it felt like the whole world was coming apart and that the whole world actually began to change because people appointed themselves to be leaders. And I felt like for a long time as a student that those grainy images were only a thing of the past. Boy, was I wrong. Because I engaged in the political process. Fast forward, those grainy images of this sort of hero from afar, John Lewis, this iconic figure, the person most associated with the precious, what he would say almost sacred right to vote. That's the way John would characterize it. That person who was an abstraction to me, a distant character, really an artifact of American history, suddenly became this person that I got to sit near whenever I went to the floor of the House after you elected me to Congress back in 2012. And as tough as that period felt, because even then I was frustrated with the state of American politics, I kind of felt like, well, at least I get to go into the chambers and sit in the same space and learn from, just by watching and listening, learn from this really iconic artifact of American history, John Robert Lewis. Not realizing that that proximity would lead to working really closely together and actually lead to what turned out to be a pretty important friendship in my life. Because as many of you may know, as good a person as John Lewis was, as good a voice as he was, as kind and decent as he appeared in public, he was that good a person as a friend. He was that good a person even for people that he'd never met. He was a kind and gentle person even to those who persecuted him, even for those people who tried to kill him. I mention that because like lesson one of John Lewis, to me, is not just about the fight and the cause and the need for all of us to use our voices to pursue justice, but to do it in a way that is consistent with the love that we profess for one another. We can't just talk about all people being equal. We can't just talk about justice being for everyone. We can't just talk about our love for our fellow people on this planet that we share the earth with. We have to express it. We have to live it. And that includes the people who bring venom to us. You know, after January 6th, I was one of those people trapped in the gallery. After January 6th, I carried a lot of poison around inside me because I was really angry that there were people that I had to go to work with every single day who fomented an insurrection and resulted in people crashing through the doors and coming at us. But I learned a bit of a lesson with my time from John. It took me a while for that lesson to manifest, I will admit. But I just remembered John talking about the people that he forgave. The people that he forgave, that he expressed love for, were the people who tried to kill him. I was in Montgomery, Alabama with John in early 2013. He had invited me to go with him for the annual pilgrimage, the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, from Selma to Montgomery, the reenactment of that. Well, it didn't take much for me to say yes when John asked if I would accompany him. And I did that. I walked across the bridge with him. And we went to the church in Montgomery. And I told this story last year. We were greeted not by the mayor, because the mayor was out of town, or the city manager, but by the chief of police of Montgomery, Alabama. John Lewis being greeted by the chief of police in Montgomery, Alabama in 2013 was a little different than the greeting that John got from the police in Montgomery, Alabama the first time he walked across that bridge. They literally tried to kill him. The chief of police welcomed us by offering John a token of apology. The chief took his badge off, the chief of police in Montgomery, and gave it to John as a token of apology, seeking John's forgiveness. And John interrupted him and forgave him passionately, expressed his kindness and love. The generosity of spirit was unbelievable to me. So I took two things from that. One, this reminder that this fight that we're engaged in is really important. And we should be passionate and strong. And it's okay for us to carry anger about what's happening in our society and to our fellow citizens. But what John taught me is to channel that energy, not to respond with anger and venom, with just a higher form and more powerful version of anger and venom. But let that positive angel, which side was the angel? Positive angel?
That side.
Let the positive angel dominate. Not the anger, but the joy, the love. Let that lead us. John's success, I watched him. John's success as a policymaker for the years that we served together in Congress were largely because even those who disagreed with him fundamentally couldn't deny his love, couldn't deny the charity that he brought into every room, couldn't deny the compassion that he brought even for people with whom he has huge differences. And it was very disarming. And of course, John's not around any longer. So leads to my other story. In 2020, when we were all experiencing COVID, again, I think some of you might recall this from when we were together last year, I made a promise to John in early 2020. I told you that we'd become friends. I didn't realize how close we'd become. Because back in 2020, when all the COVID protocols were affecting the way we did everything, that also changed the way we operated in Congress. And for a brief period of time in Congress, a member who had an illness and whose health could have been put at risk by having to congregate on the floor of the House with people from all over the place, under the rules for a brief period, a member could designate another member of Congress to quite literally carry their vote for them to the floor of the House, announce to the House that they're casting a vote on behalf of a fellow member, and then go cast that vote on their behalf. So I knew we'd become friends, but I didn't realize how close. For the last 3 months of John Lewis's incredible life, for the last 3 months of him casting a vote, again, the most precious right as he saw it, he picked this kid who grew up on West Genesee Street in Flint, Michigan, to carry his vote for him. So I made a promise to John that I'll make sure I deliver his vote, his voice, to the people's house. So why do I mention that? Number one, it's the greatest honor anybody has ever bestowed upon me as a person. But I told you I made a promise, right? Made a promise that I would carry John's vote, that I would carry John's voice. I didn't promise I would only do it for as long as John was around. And so I decided that I would keep that promise, and I'm going to ask you right now, right here, in this pavilion, in this park, on this beautiful day, to do me a favor. Help me keep that promise. Help me carry John's voice. Make sure that everybody who lives in the shadows, who feels they're outsiders, who feel they're locked away from the right to determine their own future, the very same people that John marched for back in the early 1960s. History isn't history yet. When I saw that police officer give John that badge, that was the other lesson that I got. It wasn't just about love and kindness, but it was the fact that what I thought was American history is a play that is still ongoing. It's still running. And it's up to us now, each of you, in whatever way you can, to see this through. And for me, the one thing I've committed myself to do after leaving elective politics behind, which, by the way, was not a bad decision at the time that I left. As I go back and visit Washington right now, the place is a mess. We have great voices there. But the most important voices are the voices here in this place. Please do me the favor of doing everything you can in your power to help me keep a promise I made to John Lewis, to make sure his voice continues to be heard. And we do that by appointing ourselves as activists, appointing ourselves to stand in that space. We may not give a speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, but you can give a speech on the steps of your neighbor's porch. You can talk to them every single day, and we can teach our history. If we teach our history, I am a instructor of history and politics at CMU, and I've learned one thing for sure. History is a tremendous teacher if we actually pay attention to it. Tell that history. If we tell that history, and if we really learn the lessons, the true lessons of our history, not only will we learn that we can succeed in protecting the individual freedoms that we were promised 250 years ago, we can excel at it if we all do it together. Thank you for that. Last thing is a commercial. Please join us in September 24th. Mark this on your calendars. September 24th at the Flint Institute of Arts. Some of you are familiar with the author and historian John Meacham.
Yes.
Okay? I got to know John a bit when I was down there. I have, through my offices at Central Michigan University, working with the Ballinger Eminent Persons Lecture Series, we're bringing John Meacham to Flint on September 24th to give a free lecture at the Flint Institute of Arts to simply address the question, America 250, then, now, and next. John Meacham wrote the definitive biography of John Lewis. I commend it to you. If you haven't read it, please do. But let's commit that we're not just going to make this 250th anniversary about blowing out 250 candles and celebrating our greatness. One of the things that John opened with, if you listen to that speech that he gave on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, he talked about the progress, but then he said, but we have nothing to be proud of because there are too many of us still left behind. That hasn't changed 63 years later. There are too many of us left behind. So let's commit to one another that we're going to exercise our power. We're going to learn the lessons of our history. And we're not going to let 250 years simply be a moment that we mark, but a recommitment to the promise that was made that has never yet been fully kept. We can help keep that promise if we work together. Thank you all very, very much.